Hello, welcome to Synced on Air. This is Angelique Robb, and I have a guest called Adam Hurd from A Plus Tree Services based in California. And we are having a conversation about tree trimming today. So I hope you enjoy it. Let's talk about what you posted on LinkedIn because I'm going to pull it up right now too. But what you said could be very confrontational.
I know the word you're looking for. It's not confrontational. It is
controversial.
Controversial. That's it. Gosh, today has been my day of tip of the tongue, and I just can't. Yeah, controversial for sure.
Well, yeah, because I mean, do you see this as addressing? I mean, I see in your message that you're saying to all my property managers and tree care service providers out there, tree trimming is not a service that promotes tree health, and I think that statement in itself kind of, sets the scene. Can I ask your opinion? Do you think that project managers and arborists, should we not say arborists, should we say tree care service providers?
I'd say tree care service providers because some of them are arborists and some of them aren't.
Okay.
Yeah. And what does it mean to be an arborist today anyway? It's so easy to pass that test. And even if the test is hard, if you're a good studier, people who know a lot about trees but can't study well or don't test well aren't passing it. People who study well pass it. And I don't think that it's a real adequate measure of a person's competency, to tell you the truth. But
interesting.
It is.
Yeah. Well, and again, we don't want to be afraid of bringing these things up. I want opinions on the industry, and we're starting a podcast next week, and so I'm thinking that we should have you on the podcast too to talk about this stuff. Well, I read something about a month ago that said urban trees, the statistic on urban trees is that there's a mortality rate of 50%. And I was like, oh my God, we spend all this time and effort planning and planting, and there's so many things to help us these days.
Mm-hmm.
We should not be at a 50% mortality rate anywhere.
We shouldn't. There's so much behind it too. There's so much that's going on behind why that happens.
Well, then I felt like, okay, first off, it's right tree, right place. Because I know in my little town of Lafayette, Louisiana, the downtown, which is all concrete, has bald cypress from one end to the other. Bald cypress. So you can see the knees coming up 40 feet down the street where there's no bald cypress, and it's pushing up the paving. And I've talked to business owners that say that their pipes are getting destroyed by the cypress trees.
Oh, I'm sure of it. Yeah.
I mean, you can imagine there couldn't be there probably are worse trees, but I don't know.
I mean, that's like a ficus tree for us in Southern California. So, it's fascinating how, depending on where you are in the world, being an arborist, you may not know anything about how, like when you say bald cypress, I'm like, I don't get a whole lot of them out here. So I'm waiting for you to tell me, like, what's happening with the bald cypress? Is that cool that they're lining, or is it a big problem? It'd be like lining a street full of ficus trees where I'm at, where those things just rip concrete and hardscape to shreds.
Yeah. Yeah, it is like that. And so sorry, I didn't follow on. But again, that's why we like to have a regional output, where we have the West region versus the Southeast region, because
Sure.
and I know the West it's probably too big of a region, but again, we have to do something. But
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
right tree, right place. But I think you hit on a really interesting point about tree trimming. Are we doing it to keep busy?
Yeah. So I think so. I'll go on the record and I say I think tree trimming is important, but I just
Good.
think it's important for reasons that have nothing to do with keeping trees healthy, right?
Right.
So I think that when we talk about tree trimming and when we're in the discussion as to why we would trim a tree, we really just need to be honest about what goals we're really accomplishing. On the one hand, it's easy to be a purist to be like, stop doing tree trimming that's bad for trees, right? And like, stop doing that.
Well,
and on the one hand, you're like, well,
it's not practical to do that.
yeah, it's not practical because property owners own trees. They're their trees. They have a right to determine how they want their trees to look and perform, whatever. And that's fine. Like they want to do that and it's damaging to the trees. That's unfortunate. They're going to have to recycle those trees out over time. It's going to be a long-term, more expensive investment for them to do it that way. But if they want to do it, that's fine. Let's just be honest though, as service providers, and not act as if we're doing that in some sort of way that it's good for the tree. When we do these full canopy trims, these full crown reductions, shaping, anything that we do, crown thinning is the worst. But whenever we sell these services, for some reason, there's this mentality in the tree care industry and this belief system by tree owners who are hiring companies to do this, that for some reason, this is a need to be performed for the sake of the trees. Mm-hmm. And it's just flat out not the case. Like that's not congruent with how trimming actually affects trees. And so I saw a post on LinkedIn the other day by a guy who owns that's okay. So down in Southern California, we are inundated with landscaping companies that have tree care divisions. And they drive me nuts because these tree care divisions sell super dirt cheap tree work. And 90% of the time you see them over thinning trees. They're quote lacing trees, which I hate that term.
What is lacing trees?
Lacing is some sort of cowboy term that somehow got adopted that basically is when somebody just completely trims out all the material in the tree and just leaves some stuff on the ends, so that you can fully see through the tree and stuff.
I've seen that. I didn't know that was a term for it. Okay.
Well, it's not an ANSI standards recognized term, nor is it a term that's recognized within the ISA, but it's an understood term insofar as
like a layman's term.
Like it makes trees look lacy, like a doily lace. I don't use it. I refuse to use it. I get cringy every single time I even hear the word in reference to that kind of service. But it's not good for trees. And ornamentally, from an untrained eye, you could say, "Oh, that looks really cool. Looks really nice." Sure, ornamentally, if all you care about is aesthetics and you aren't concerned about any of the impacts that it has on a tree physiologically or whatever, then sure, it can be pretty, right? Whatever. But these landscape companies with tree care divisions, they sell this really horrible work. They train clients to believe that this is how it should be done. This is good work. This is good service. This is a good product. And all the while we have other companies like the one that I work for and others like ours that are really promoting tree work that is intended to promote a healthy urban forest. And that work is more expensive. And even though we don't take as much out, we hire people who are trained on how to make the cuts. We bring in educated professionals on all aspects of the team. And when we do that work, it also takes a little bit more time because we take care and precision to make the right cuts. Whereas these other guys come through and they just trim, clean, and then they're out of there. Yeah. And so we're constantly fighting against this tide of really negative belief surrounding this idea that we purchase this service because it's good too. And it's just, nothing could be further from the truth. And so when this landscape CEO put this post that said, let me see if I can find it. Hang on.
Sure.
Okay. It says pruning trees is not just about aesthetics. It's about promoting the health and safety of the tree. And then he went in to further say, proper arbor care allows for better air circulation and sunlight penetration, which in turn promotes photosynthesis and helps the tree to produce chlorophyll. This ultimately leads to a healthier and more beautiful landscape. Let's work together to ensure the longevity and vitality of our green spaces through proper arbor care. And I read that, and I'm just like, you're totally wrong. Like, I mean, this is a CEO of a really big company in Orange County, and I'm sure that his intentions are really good and that he really believes that this is true, but he's wrong. And it's this kind of thinking and this kind of bad information that's being given to our clients in the form of good education that is really causing this industry to be inundated with service providers that are doing a disservice to the urban forest, and they're doing a further disservice to our customer base because they're giving our customers a bad education. And so, I responded to that post, and then I just felt compelled to make my own post because I've got a huge network of clients and people on LinkedIn. I've got 5,000 plus whatever. I'm like, I'm just gonna put this truth out there and just see what ends up happening with it. Because I've been doing this for over 20 years. I'm sick of it. I'm so sick of the bad information and for it just being so.
Well, it pulls down the industry.
It pulls the whole industry down.
If we don't, already we have an industry that can be seen as, cheaper, because, we have clients that, oh no, I can get it cheaper by somebody else. But what we're always battling against that cheapness from uninsured, untrained people that, don't.
Well, the difficulty part is when the cheapness actually comes from people who are fully licensed, fully insured. That's the worst part.
Well, that is the worst.
Comes from them, because then it's like a couple things happen. One, it means that they're telling everybody this industry is a scarcity mindset industry and we're only as good as a commodity, right? And it's like the tree care industry is one of the last industries that should be commoditized because we're dealing with biological organisms, and we're dealing with
it's the health of the
life-threatening, right? Every single time one of these guys puts that saddle on and hoists himself up into the tree with all that sharp equipment, they're putting their life at risk. Now, it's not like they're jumping out of a plane every single day or doing something that crazy, because if you trust your equipment, if you pay attention to what's happening around you, if you're using your stuff correctly and you're practicing within a culture of safety, you're going to go home every day safe and you're going to have a super satisfying career. But the reality is something could go wrong. Mm-hmm. And so why would you put yourself in a position to commoditize that? And then if a company who is fully licensed and insured, has the contractor's licenses that they need to, is hiring people who have college educations and things of that sort, everything looks like on paper that they're doing it right. If they're selling this work for cheap and not doing the work properly, what does that tell about their value system, about how much they really care about the urban culture? Hey, we'll sell this work cheap, and we'll trim these trees fast. We don't really think that investing in the urban forest is really an important thing, and your actions and your pricing dictate your value system. Mm-hmm. And that's just something that I think is true and unavoidable. And so the more a company behaves like a commodity, the less I think they really value their trade.
Yeah, I think you're right. And we have this fantastic industry that, when you think about it, with climate change and issues like this, we can make the biggest impact on the future of the planet I mean, how we are placed like that. We have science behind our industry. It's just that it gets diluted when people are not doing it right and not educating clients or other industry members right.
Yeah. Or if they think they're doing educating, they're giving bad information, which is the worst, because these same guys are the ones say we need to educate our clients. We need to educate our clients. And I'm like, you're right. So please educate them with something that's true, like don't educate them to believe lies, like educate them or falsities. I don't say lies because I don't think that they're intentionally misguiding their clients. I just think that they're ignorant. I just think that they don't have good information. And they have not invested in their own knowledge and product knowledge by talking to plant pathologists, talking to researchers, talking to other companies in the area who are doing things differently and are viewed as experts, talking to board certified master arborists. They're not doing these things. And so, they just go along and continue to share bad information, or maybe they'll read one article and they'll find one thing in the article that aligns with the belief that they already have. And then they'll say, look, they'll take it out of the context and they'll say, this expert said this and I say this. It's like, well, that's way out of context, man. I mean, for example, sunlight penetration promotes photosynthesis, which helps trees produce more chlorophyll. That's true, but it's detrimental to the tree when you're taking 50% of the canopy out every single year, right?
Yeah, and if you're slowly killing the tree.
Yeah, I don't know about you, but I just haven't seen a whole lot of tree care companies out in the redwood forest. And those trees seem to be doing really well. Yeah. So
what do you think? We have what you wrote in the LinkedIn profile, which is great because you give the reasons for the proper reasons for tree trimming, and you say, let's not fool ourselves that we need tree trimming for health. You're right. Nature does it itself. I have a water oak in my backyard, and around here, water oaks are seen as, they're going to fall on your house. A hurricane come through, have to take out any water oak. But we have this beautiful water oak that towers above our house. And my goal was just make sure it's healthy and make sure anything around the base isn't detrimental. And there were a few limbs that needed to be cut so they weren't, they told me about how you look for the V's.
Yep.
Versus the U's. And so they were just looking at each junction and also where the weight was maybe, hanging over too much. And they did my husband was like, did they really do anything there? And I was like, yeah, they did, but you shouldn't actually be able to tell.
Exactly.
It should be done so well and so thoughtful that they spent one climber in that tree, I think, spent half a day, but you couldn't actually tell. Yeah. And I love that because, again, nature, you'll have some limbs or some branches, and I'm not an arborist, you can tell, but, you'll have them die off and they'll fall. And I think that, I just think, wow, that was meant to happen. That's it.
Well, yeah,
thinning
in
itself.
Nature that happens, right? So, that's the difference between a tree in nature, right, and a tree in an urban forest, right? Is that we have the trees interface with different environments, right? So, in the natural forest, we don't have a whole lot of concern about limbs dropping and falling on cars or buildings or whatever. So, we have to address those kinds of things when they come up because they happen with trees, right? So it's not like I'm saying
make it safe.
Touch a tree, but touch it for the right reasons. But when you say a water oak, by the way, my grandfather's from New Orleans.
Oh yeah,
and he eventually ended up moving out to La Mesa, California, which is in San Diego area. and he planted Louisiana water oaks on his property. And he had a huge, gigantic, like 110-foot Louisiana water oak, one in his backyard and one in the front yard. And it did exactly what yours did. Magnificent tree. It's still there. It's probably 56, 60 years old. He planted them from acorns, just an absolutely beautiful tree. So when you said that, I was like, oh, I got a little nostalgia. I know what those trees look like. They're beautiful.
They can be beautiful. I think what's happened is that the ones that have fallen, and it was really interesting. I think trees are so neat that they adapt to their environment, and we had this friend that had, when he told me this story, he was like, oh, this water oak fell and it hit my roof. And then so we removed all trees from our front garden. But what happened when he told me further back, he goes, oh, well, when we moved in, we had lots of trees. And then we had all of these, he kind of pointed out, we had a bunch of trees here and we took them out. So what happened is, it was like a story. If you imagine that you had a little forest, and then you removed half of the forest, and then the tree that was left had been protected all its life, and then a hurricane came through and knocked it down, and it hit part of his house. And I was like, well, it's because you took away its protection.
You're actually right. That's actually, so Ed Gilman at the University of Florida does studies on this stuff, and
he wrote for our magazine once. We have
he's rad. So he talks about that stuff, and there's another guy from the UK, or no, he's in Canada now, and his name is Julian Dunster, and he is the one who pioneered the track program. And Julian Dunster, he's fantastic. Oh my gosh, you would love him. He's great. The guy's got the most amazing eyebrows in the world. But Julian Dunster, he's so funny. He's so smart, and he's a expert in tree biomechanics and risk assessment. Okay. And he talks about that. He calls it the idiot stand, which is where you have a bunch of trees in one group is called a stand of trees.
Okay.
And there's dominant trees, subdominant trees, subordinate trees, and they all play a role. And so when you get rid of all the dominant trees, well, those trees, and this happens in development, so they'll cut down this whole row of trees, and then they'll leave this row of trees standing, and then in a couple of years, all the outside trees just start failing. And the reason is because the dominant trees that they removed were all used to absorbing all the wind energy, and the vibrations down the trunk caused them to develop different roots that would respond to those kinds of forces, so that they would reinforce their ability for the tree to stay in the ground. Well, you remove all of that, and now these trees are exposed to elements that are extreme that they've never been exposed to, and haven't had the time to be able to develop a root system that is strong enough to support them in it. Because think about the friend's water oak who fell, right? Like, how many hurricanes have come through Louisiana?
Oh,
how many gigantic trees
in 40
have seen
years? Yeah, it's like sometimes 2 or 3, or at least up to hurricane strength winds. It could be 2 or 3 a season. Yeah.
And then they get ripped out of the ground.
But,
so now
but I thought it was
in the trees so they don't fall.
But now everybody starts going, oh, I've got a water oak, got to get it removed. It kills me because some beautiful trees have been taken out of, I mean, the neighborhood that we moved into in Lafayette was like the most, the older neighborhood had the biggest tree canopy, or the oldest tree canopy, and that was my thing. I want trees in our yard. I want mature trees. And we've been here 3 years, and it's slowly, it's like after every hurricane, people just randomly have trees removed. And
that's crazy. After the hurricane, they removed the tree that survived the hurricane.
Yeah. So it's actually against what you think. They go, oh my God, I saw a tree like this one fall on the next road, so I'm getting mine removed. And then they've lost the shade. They've lost the energy efficiency for their home. Why would you go outside if you don't have trees in South Louisiana?
Well, here's the other thing too, right? Like, so one tree fell and everybody reacts to it. Well, here's a question. 1 tree fell out of 10. So 90% of the trees survived. Okay. So why did that tree fall? What happened? Did anybody go look to see, hey, was there any indicators that this tree had its root cuts in order to put in a new concrete slab?
Well,
was there new construction around the tree? Yeah. Were there any indicators that maybe this tree in particular had some wood decay fungus on it that caused it to be a liability and it should have been taken out long before the hurricane came? There's so many things that could be contributing to one of these trees because there's such a low percentage of trees that fail in these storm events.
Yeah.
And then there are times in an urban environment where a tree literally has expired its useful service life. And we have to understand that dynamic because we do need to recycle our trees in our urban environment. They're not natural forests, but we don't do that, right? We don't plan that way. And so all of a sudden, all of our tree removals are reactionary. Or we hold on to trees for too long and we don't remove them 15 years ago like we should have and put in a new tree. Yeah. And then now we have a tree that's 15 years older than it should be, and the new tree doesn't even come close to being able to replace it in time.
Yeah, yeah.
Whereas had you done that 15 years ago and you remove that big tree, you would have a tree now that's 15 years old and decently sizable,
Yeah, and I wonder about these things. I mean, what we are trying to do as for the landscape professionals is open up these discussions, because I really believe there's a lot of people that are passionate about their niche in the industry. And really, as let's say, our audience, we're trying to, target it towards business owners that kind of oversee everything from design, construction, maintenance, because we feel like that's where these business owners can make the most impact, because they're weighing up these things. They're going, okay, we have this property, we're going to put a design in here. Okay, well, first you have to assess, just like what you said, is this tree, it's beautiful, but how old is it? Is it, do we need a plan for succession?
Yeah.
Or do we need to remove it? Or is it worth saving and moving and protecting the roots for construction? And I do wonder if, do we go too far or not far enough in these assessments? And then, during construction, something else happens, or it progresses through construction and then into maintenance. Do we ever have those, that balance of decision making that we need to have, which is what you're saying? Okay, is there any disease? Okay, how are we going to construct around this? Okay, how are we going to, decide if we need other trees in the area to replace it? And, that's a whole strategy. What's your opinion on how we do this better as an industry?
Well,
sorry, that's kind of a big question, but
it's difficult, right? I think probably because one of the challenges is that we already have such a solidly existing infrastructure that it's not like you can start from the beginning, right? So then how do we do things? How do we do things moving forward? Well, I think maybe one place to start is changing the way we do our landscaping in new developments, right? I was looking for a company on LinkedIn they're in the UK, and I want to say it's like Blue Urban Design or something like that. I can't remember what it is, but they install these things called tree cells in their
soil cells.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. There are people doing that in the US.
Yeah. Yeah. So, starting to implement using those as part of your urban planning with trees, I think is really, really smart. Because you're basically saying trees are a priority. And so we want big trees and we want healthy trees in our downtown landscapes.
Blue, green, urban.
What is it?
Blue, green, urban.
Blue, green, urban. Yeah.
They are actually in our issue that just came out.
I really like what those guys are doing. I think that they're really, really smart. And they're Blue Green Urban. Yep. They sent me one of their books. I have that book. Oh, look at it. Oh yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep. Green Blue Urban, right?
Green Blue Urban, GBU.
Green, Blue,
yeah.
Urban. Yeah. I love what those guys are doing.
There are other companies doing it as well, but I think you're right. Urban, it's giving the tree more space, and more nutrients, and more, microbes, and water retention.
We need to start paying attention to our soils more. You can't ever make any private company spend more money on their landscaping and trees. But I mean, for crying out loud, if we really are serious about the climate change, I know that's really dicey topic. You start saying climate change and everyone's like, oh, you're a crazy liberal hippie. It's like, well, I vote totally differently than that, but it doesn't change the fact that I've seen change in there's been temperature change
measurable,
to say the least, right?
Yeah.
So it's been getting hotter for longer, and the trees aren't used to that.
The seas are getting hotter.
Yeah,
plants are changed. Yeah.
And we're also using reclaimed water in our landscape instead of potable water. So we're also introducing a water that has higher salinity content in it and higher alkaline content in it. So we're changing the chemistry of our soils. I mean, if we're not paying attention to our soils and investing into our soils around trees, that's also going to hurt our trees as well. And then, I mean, just conceptually being willing this is all really about commercial property owners, is being willing to consider that your landscape could look different and it could still be awesome. So maybe your landscape doesn't have to be all these insanely laced out and heavily manicured trees. Maybe your landscape could look pretty awesome with some really full, healthy tree canopies. And maybe part of that means, as part of the reset, when we start getting rid of some of these trees, the new trees that we reinstall, like we prune them for structure and building clearance, and that's it. And then we hire talented people, educated people to make sure that the trees are safe, that the structure is continuing to be managed well, and
give their roots and from construction, give their roots more room and more, like you said, better soil. But I also think, underground anchoring. I mean,
I'm not even really totally familiar with underground anchoring. I heard about it in passing a couple of times, but tell me a little bit more about that, because I don't think we do that out here at all.
Well, so there are different systems. There are quite a few providers, but the way it works is that you have the root ball, and you almost have like guy wires tamping, that you tamp down into the ground, into the subsoil. So deep
from the roots.
So you have maybe guy wires on top of the root ball, and then they go deeper into the soil than you've even dug, into virgin subsoil. And then there's a way to hammer them in, and then it's like an anchor. You flex, you pull a guy wire up a certain way. I mean, I'm not explaining this very well, but then it like shoehorns the anchor into place so it can't come out. So again, what you're doing, it's more like artificial roots underground until it grows there. Because one thing that I've seen, and I don't think I believed it truly until I saw it happen on my property, but you shouldn't use tree stakes if you don't have to, because then the roots don't expand the way they would. And we lived in a really windy part of Scotland. And so I tried to not use stakes. Why I didn't use underground anchors? Let's not talk about that. But no, we had really rocky soil, and it was like, oh my goodness, I don't know if it was like granite, it was like you couldn't use a shovel to dig a hole. You had to use a digger. So I was like, okay, We'll just get this in the ground. We'll stake them. And these trees had been in place for a few years, and I had to stake it from one direction because the wind always came from that direction. So I only had stakes on one side. One day the wind changed the direction and the tree fell over. It had been planted there for 3 or 4 years, was growing, looked healthy. So then I dug it up. You wouldn't believe the roots and how they were distributed. It was like 180 degrees, a root system. On the other side, barely any root system.
Yeah.
And it's because I had to have it staked, and I should have used the underground anchors. But again, I can send you, the companies that I know about after this.
Yeah.
But
another place too it starts is actually getting good trees from the nursery too. That's actually another huge problem, because if you see the trees in the nursery, they top them and then they limb them all the way up, so you get this skinny pole with this tuft at the top, and it's like,
and then the wind takes it.
All the lower branching is gone. So I think nurseries keeping lower branching on all the trees is actually really, really important. Stop manicuring your trees so heavily in the nurseries. Ed Gilman talks a lot about the negative impacts that long-term containerization has in trees. So when your trees have been in a container for too long, they get circling and girdling roots and they don't ever establish. So if you're going to plant trees, and you're going to buy container trees, then if you're going to plant trees, you're going to buy container trees. Then when you plant them in the ground, you need to score the roots so that you cut off the girdling so that the roots can lateralize as they're establishing. But it's all these kinds of practices that so many different parties need to play, that the idea of change is just, it's just like steering a massive ship, to get it to go in the right direction. There's so many parties that play different parts, and it's all about where the money is.
Well, even the mulching. I have been to about 5 new developments. And when I say new, I mean 5 years. And I was like, oh my goodness, all these trees are dying because they have a foot of mulch up the trunk. You can't even tell where the root flare is. And the fact that we're not planting them at the right depths. We're probably not giving them enough soil. We're probably not staking them so that they survive. It's frustrating to me because I'm seeing this, and it's my industry that I love so much, and we can do so much good. And if we're not showing people the right way, nobody even knows. And then it's people wasting money on trees, and it's, trees slowly dying all around us, even newly planted ones. Well, I think we can only start with what we know. And step 1 is writing a good article, giving you some credit on this, turning it into a podcast. And I mean, I've been recording this. I'm thinking, gosh, I could probably just edit a bit, and put it out there.
I'd be okay with that. You're more welcome. I'm happy to be a guest on a podcast too. We got to wrap it up, but obviously we could easily keep talking, and
maybe it should be a series of how decision makers and leaders in our industry need to sit up and take notice of the downward spiral of what we're doing to trees.
Your goal in order to do that is you've got to be able to find somebody who is, an asset manager, somebody who owns some commercial real estate or some of these, multifamily housing companies, and be able to talk to somebody who is in the purchasing department, or somebody who is a decision maker at a very high level, and who really does want to see change and is really wanting to impact, the climate, air quality, greener communities, carbon sequestering, et cetera. Someone who's really, really doing the work in that area and has a pretty impressive footprint. If you can find that person and get them on a show, I mean, that's certainly a great place to start. Somebody who's influential in that market.
Yeah.
But, there's we just need the people with the money to be seeing their trees as valuable. And until the people with the money see their trees as valuable and demand that their trees are cared for a certain way, it's just not going to happen. And that's the most frustrating part, because as a service provider, I can only do what somebody will pay me to do. Outside of that, I can be on a podcast, I can write an article, I can write a book, but until
nobody pays
the person
attention
to do the work, it cares. And their money is spent to illustrate that. It's just going to be us fighting the fight,
Well, we got to start somewhere.
Yep, for sure. 100%.
I'd like to thank our podcast sponsor for the week, StrataRise. StrataRise is the professional's choice for support and leveling systems for decking, flooring, pavers, and rooftop gardens. Save time and create flexibility in your projects with our solutions. You can check them out at www.stratarise.us. And for listening to us, you can use the code TURF10 for 10% off in the month of May and June. So go on and check them out if you don't know what they do, and give a call to Bob Haley, who is the owner there in South Carolina. Thanks.
Saludos, Amy aquí con el resumen breve del podcast de hoy. Estoy muy emocionada por este episodio. ¿Por qué? Pues porque tenemos un arborista en vivo hoy. Veo todo el tiempo como la industria tiende a separar los diferentes oficios que componen la industria del paisajismo, y los arbolistas son uno con los que estamos tratando de involucrarnos activamente. Como muchos sabemos, los árboles son parte de la tierra, y en la mayoría de los casos son parte de cada proyecto del paisaje y deben ser considerados. Hoy conversamos con Adam Hurd de A+ Tree Care, con varias ubicaciones en el norte y el sur de California, el oeste del Pacífico y también Utah. La visión de la empresa es inspirar la gestión forestal urbana a través de la sostenibilidad, la educación y el cuidado de los demás. Con más de 20 años en la industria, Adam nos brinda sus conocimientos sobre el sector de árboles y la industria del paisaje, los principales desafíos y preocupaciones que deben tener en cuenta. Para empezar, Adam explica el significado de ser un arbolista y cómo un asesor de servicios de cuidado de árboles no es el mismo, y como muchas veces no tienen los mismos requisitos profesionales. También nos muestra en la evaluación del término cuidado de los árboles y lo que está mal con ese término. También cómo saber cuándo es el momento adecuado para recortar y podar para promover la salud del árbol, y los impactos negativos de la contaminación a largo plazo de los árboles. Muy importante, también habla sobre cómo comprender la ventaja del cuidado adecuado del senador y cómo conduce a una mejor circulación del aire y penetración de la luz solar. El servicio tiene un costo y estoy segura de que todos conocemos el dicho: obtienes lo que pagas. Pero, ¿qué obtienes realmente cuando eliges un proveedor más barato que no tiene licencia, ni seguro, ni capacitación? Mejorar los efectos de los desastres naturales y el cambio climático y encontrar una solución a través del reciclaje de árboles caídos en entornos urbanos, así como la importancia del anclaje subterráneo y cómo y por qué funciona. Aquí en SYNCT nos apasiona la educación y la conexión, y nos encanta recibir la afirmación directamente de los profesionales con los que nos conectamos sin importar en qué campo específico de la industria del paisaje pueden servir. Esos valores siguen surgiendo y manteniéndose verdaderos. Adam comparte cómo los buenos artículos, conectarse con personas influyentes en el mercado y ver el valor de los árboles ayudarán a frenar el ciclo de árboles moribundos. Y como siempre, nos gusta terminar el podcast con la pregunta sobre los pensamientos en cómo mejorar este sector y la industria en total. Adam expresa cómo aplicar los diseños del Blue Urbanismo, presentando atención a la salud del suelo y las consideraciones propietario de una propiedad comercial, conducirá a una elevación en esta industria y mejores resultados para los arbolistas. Gracias por escuchar y vaya a nuestro sitio de web para leer el artículo completo en español. Si deseas ser parte de nuestro podcast o conoces una gran profesión con muchas ideas para compartir con la industria, contáctenos en nuestro sitio de web. Recuerde darme gusta, seguir y suscríbese a Sync en todas nuestras sociales redes. Hasta la próxima semana.